Hello, my friends and colleagues. Welcome to Health Talks, your insight into public health related topics. I'm your host, Thomas McMinn, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Jenny Johnson about news releases. My friends, everyone listening, this is Jenny Johnson. For the one person that's listening to this that doesn't know who she is, Jenny, give us a 10,000 foot level overview of what you do for the department and what you can do for them.
So I'm the public information officer. So what I can help you with is anything media related, anything communications related, social media, content, website, writing news releases, interacting with reporters, developing strategic communication plans, working with ad agencies and vendors on communication related projects, anything like that. I would really like to know what you're doing.
So Jenny, if a program's coming to you and they have no clue of how to even start the process, take me from the beginning.
So what we ideally hope happens is that a staff person in a program has an idea about something they want to promote to the media. They come and talk to us from the beginning instead of hoping that they can do it on their own, because we can give them some guidance on whether the news release topic is actually appropriate for a news release, or perhaps it's better suited for just a social media post, or maybe they actually need to do a press conference and they need to have a news advisory with it instead. So there's a lot of different options to explore depending on what you want to do. So we always tell programs it's better to ask sooner rather than later and get in trouble. So that's the first thing. Programs need to make sure that they're thinking about it in enough time that we can schedule it on the department's media calendar. So we actually have a calendar that our office keeps that has all the news releases or news type events on it. And so we can make sure that your news release isn't going to go out the same day as something else that's already planned, or maybe something's going on politically that our executive team knows about and we can't do a news release that day. So letting us know sooner helps you get that scheduled on the calendar. You just simply email us or come and talk to us and we can pull up that calendar with you and tell you what's available or not available to schedule. Then we'll work with the programs to really kind of dive into the content area. One thing that we sort of have a hard time with is a lot of times programs have a good idea of something that they want to get the word out about, but it's not necessarily something that the media is going to take interest in. And so we have to figure out either a way to spin that to get the media's attention or come up with a different way to distribute that information. So for our agency, the media is actually quite responsive to new data. So let's say you want to promote some World Asthma Day or something like that, a national observance. According to our department policy, that's actually not a good reason to do a news release, and we won't typically let programs do a news release just to promote some national or countrywide observance of some kind. You've got to put a spin on it to talk about why does this matter to the Department of Health, or what is the Department of Health doing? What is the state doing? And so we'll sit down with you and kind of brainstorm that stuff out. Do you have new data that you can release in conjunction with this? And then we can happen to just mention this observance at the end of the release and tie it together that way. And so your story actually becomes about something that the agency is doing or something new that's happening rather than just this yearly observance that happens from year to year.
The program has something newsworthy. Are they expected to draft it out first? Do you draft it? How does that work?
That's a good question. So it kind of depends. I would say for the most part, the programs have the capacity themselves to at least take a stab at drafting a news release. There's a template that the department follows. It's somewhat fluid, but we're also pretty strict on you following this kind of layout and format, and it just fits our agency's style. The media expects that from us, and so it may not be how another agency would write a release or even how you would write a release if you were a reporter yourself, but it works for our agency and the media responds really well to it. So you can always ask us for that template. I always tell staff that are new to writing news releases to use past examples, either from within their own program, or I can send them examples based on what type of story they're wanting to share. So if it's going to be like a data report that they're releasing, which, by the way, always gets media attention in Utah for us. I always encourage programs to do news releases around new data. But anyways, if it's something like that, I can go back and find really successful and effective news releases that we've done before on data reports and send them to them and say, kind of copy this format. We always start out a news release with what is it that the media needs to know right now in that very first paragraph. So if it's about new data, just tell them right up front what it is. And then we typically go into the next paragraph is a quote from somebody within the department talking about why this is important. Then we'll go back into kind of the meat of the data report or the findings from a report or whatever the story might be. If we have an example of how this has impacted real people, that's where we would start to incorporate that piece in there. And then we always end with, for more information, visit and give them a resource that is directly related to the health department. So just keep in mind as you're writing a release, you need to think like the department. It needs to be branded the department. It needs to come from the department. It needs to talk about what the department is doing. Sometimes programs get a little frustrated with us about is they'll be working with another agency or a partner in the community that, let's say, is doing this really fantastic thing, or maybe they're putting on some type of a conference or something that's worthy of attention in the public's eye, but it's not actually the Department of Health's thing. And so they're just kind of working with them to plan it. And they come to us and say, we want to do a news release for this conference. And as we get working with them, my office realizes, actually, this is not a Department of Health thing. We're just kind of there to help. And we have to be very careful because just like our agency would be pretty upset if a partner in the community or another state or agency or university decided to publish our story under their brand, we would be quite upset. And so we will often tell programs, this is actually something that they should be issuing to the media. We're happy to look at things and provide suggestions on news releases, or we've drafted news releases for them before as a suggestion and given it to them. But we can't put this coming from the Department of Health because it's not really our thing. It's their thing. We're one of many partners that they're working with on it. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind too. If we tell you no on a news release, we usually have a pretty good reason for it, and we'll help you think of other ideas about how to get that information out. Maybe your idea is better suited for social media. A news release doesn't really work for promoting a conference to get people there, right? If you have this incredible speaker that's coming and their story is amazing and it directly ties into an issue that's a priority for the department, and maybe we have new data that we're going to happen to release around that same time, then let's talk about doing a news release from the agency. Otherwise, maybe they should be looking at distributing it through different listservs to people that would be interested in going to this conference, or on social media or other ways. And so don't feel bad if we tell you no. We won't totally abandon you, but we usually have a good reason for it.
Sure, so it seems like you're going to help programs out regardless. If they don't have their news release, they're still going to be able to get their information they find relevant out to an intended audience.
Right, we don't want to just leave them floundering. And, different programs have different staff capacity to do media outreach. And we know that, for programs that don't have a lot of experience doing this and don't really have the manpower to try to learn it, we would much rather just write the news release for you, working with your content experts to get the information that we feel is really important to the media and that you feel is important to get out, and let Charlotte or I draft it for you and then give it to you for feedback. We would rather do that for you. That's our job, to help you with that. For programs that have designated paid staff who work with the media or are just really active with the media, even if they don't have a designated staff person, they usually have done news releases before. And what will happen is they will take a stab at drafting the news release. This is for anyone. A draft will come to our office edits that pretty heavily and approves it, sends it back down for comments or back and forth edits. Once we have a final one, then our office actually sends it out on behalf of the department to the media. So we keep a listserv of all the media across the state, print, TV, radio, all of the ones we can find. And we issue that on behalf of the department. So staff don't have to worry about sending this out to anyone. We take care of all that for them, and we have the final yes or no approval on all news releases. So
sure. Is there any other locations that the news release lives on?
So we typically will post either a link to the news release on Twitter, or sometimes, depending on the content in the release, we'll draft a social media post for Facebook and Twitter that deals with that topic area. We may not be posting the news release itself just because our audiences on those channels may be different. But we often converse with the reporters back and forth on Twitter with news releases or content that we're promoting through news release, and we find that if we can send it out over social media and we send it out through our regular channels to them that morning, we seem to get more attention because they're seeing it in multiple places. And they'll also start to see, oh, this is a bigger deal than I thought because, another station's reporting it now, or the public's talking about it. And so they'll pick it up that way. So we do send it out over social media. If you have a very specific message that you want us to use on social media, on Twitter or Facebook, let us know. Otherwise, we just kind of take the liberty about what's in the final release and tweak it a little bit for social.
Sounds good. So the program has their news release, it's launched, the department as a whole has used the OPIM office to push it out as well. Now what can they expect?
So I will tell you that you better be at your desk ready to take calls, because we are constantly amazed when programs will say we want to do a news release or a press conference or an advisory, and then they don't actually have staff available for interviews. So if it's that important to send this out, to take the time to draft it, to work with us on editing, you better make sure you have people in your program ready to do interviews for the media the day you send it out and the next couple days after, because there's always going to be stations that pick up a story kind of late, and we need to make sure that we can fulfill their request for an interview or for more information. So make sure when you schedule something, it works for your staff to be available. That is the number one thing that will get you in trouble with OPIM, is if you're not available and you said you were.
So what if a program doesn't feel comfortable answering media requests based off of this? Will the OPIM office address that or handle that?
That's a good point and a good question, because sometimes what will happen too is something will be issued nationally from like the CDC or another agency, or something's going on and it's not necessarily the Department of Health's role to make an announcement to the media, but we're going to get calls and the program knows it. Send us some speaking points. Designate a point person for us to work with, either that point person being comfortable with doing interviews. We are always going to help new staff, train them how to deal with media interviews. We're not just going to send you out to the reporters and not help you. We'll go down with you. We can coach you. A lot of the times they're not doing live interviews, and so we can come down and coach you as you're doing the interview itself, have you stop, try it again, say it a different way. And the reporters are great. They know if you're new, they're going to be really nice to you and work with you. If you're absolutely terrified of it and you want nothing to do with it, or maybe the staff just, some people just aren't really good at it, and we don't necessarily want them in front of the camera either. And so in that case, if you can give us a content expert that we can work with, and you can give us some key messaging, Tom, Charlotte, and I can take care of it for you. If we know where to go for information on your subject, it's easy for us to kind of weed through some of these media calls and take care of the ones that they're just calling to kind of explore this issue. They don't really know if they want to do a story, but what's kind of going on. And so if we can kind of head that off for you and save you some time, then we'll filter down the interviews requests that are really the meat of what they're wanting. They want to be here to get an on-camera interview or a radio interview. That's when we're going to call you up and say, can you do this? If not, can you give me the information and I can do it for you? So we still do interviews for programs if they're not here or they're not comfortable. It's always better to have the experts in the programs do the interview. The media gets tired of talking to the same three people. But in a pinch, we are more than happy to do that and more than happy to walk someone through what to expect.
Great. So to kind of wrap things up, you see a lot of these come across your desk. Number one pet peeve.
Number one pet peeve. Oh, man. Well, Charlotte and I are pretty picky editors, so don't feel bad when we Oxford comma your news release. I like my Oxford commas. That's definitely a pet peeve. I would say the biggest pet peeve is programs not utilizing the agency's brand and clout. So what I mean by that is a lot of times we identify ourselves as, I work for the Violence and Injury Prevention Program. You're identifying yourself as with your program. not necessarily the Department of Health. And when you're dealing with the media and the public, we want everything branded as Department of Health first. So when I get a news release and it reads from the program, I'm always going to change it to read from the Department of Health. Your program will always come secondary to the Department of Health because you actually are the same thing. You're the Department of Health. The news release is being issued from the Department of Health. And so, we can certainly acknowledge the program in the release. I'm not saying that we don't acknowledge the program, but it's secondary and the Department of Health always comes first. So you need to think like the Department of Health. You need to write it as if it's coming from the Department of Health and not your program. And if you don't understand what that means, you will once you send it up and I get my hands on it and I edit it. But I'm doing that because the media is very well versed in what the agency's brand and name is, and they don't distinguish the Department of Health and the programs. They go to the Department of Health. There's a lot of clout and authority coming from the agency that we need to capitalize on that's actually going to benefit you in the long run with your news release and your media coverage than if you tried to do it on your own, because they get confused about who is this. And if you look at, other major agencies, state agencies, universities, even nonprofits in our communities that have very strong brands, they are identifying as Intermountain Healthcare, the Department of Human Services, University of Utah. That's how they identify. They don't identify as a department within a university. That's not what they do. It's branded their agency. And so that's probably besides the Oxford comma, my biggest pet peeve is we are the Department of Health first and foremost, and that's how we interact with the media is as the Department of Health.
And with that, we always have that one thing that we love to see. What is that one thing when it comes across your desk and you look at that news release, you're like, they get it, thank you.
Oh, I love data and news releases, and I know that's so weird to people, but I feel like the media is just so responsive to us when we issue data. We usually get calls when we include data in something, and we're pretty good at spinning your data to make it new. And I think people are afraid to do a data-only news release or a data-only press conference. We've done many data-only press conferences, and we always get great turnout. And so I would always tell programs that no matter what you're doing with your news release, you've got to try to find a way to incorporate data in there. They're going to ask us for it anyways. You might as well just give it to them up front.
Excellent. Jenny Johnson, thank you so much for taking your time today. This is Health Talks, your insight into public health related topics.